if we think about life as being all about the conversion of energy, I think that helps us to, first of all, understand ourselves, understand our physical health, our mental health a lot better, because we'll be able to understand and recognize and be aware of all the different energies that are actually coming into us and impacting in us, and all the different energy flows within us. But also, I think it helps us or opens a bit of a doorway for us to return to a more cosmological way of seeing us as humans, frankly, a more cosmological way of seeing our place in the universe. And by cosmological, what I mean is that rather than seeing ourselves as these distinct atomized entities that are wholly independent and we can do whatever you want to do or whatever, that view I personally feel has led to, is what is the root cause of much of the suffering and destruction in the world today, in the modern world. By having a more cosmological worldview, we start to be able to think of ourselves as being part of a a family, if you like, or a massive tapestry, a great dance. When you read books like Yurugu by Marimba Ani, and I'm sure there's many other books that make the same point, you will see that unlike the Western dominated modern philosophy of individualism and atomization and materialism and that sort of thing, unlike in the worldview that we're raised in and we're immersed in, the first world peoples, the original peoples, indigenous peoples all over the world, Africa, Asia, the Americas, even in Europe as well, I'd imagine, had a different perception, a different conception of what being a human was all about. And in this conception, the human identity, or whatever the words that they used for it, our being as people, as humans, was the meaning of that being came from our interconnectedness with the wider cosmos, starting with our immediate environment. We people got their meaning about their lives, meaning for their lives. The meaning, the purpose of people's lives came through their interrelationship. First of all, with each other, with other people. So communalism, you could say, and that obviously, downstream of that feeds into different kinds of social relations, communalistic social relations, collectivism, that sort of stuff. But also not just with other people, but also with other members of the animal family, other members of the nature, basically, flora and fauna, trees, stars, the cosmic, celestial beings, celestial beings, and so on and so forth. It was the interrelation between us and all of this wide, beautiful web of creatures and entities in the universe. That's what life was all about. That's where we got our identity. That's where people got their identity, was through that interconnectionness. And connection with the environment in these kind of worldviews was critical, or is critical, because it's through our connection with our environment, particularly with the land, it's through that interconnection that we have that communion with the wider cosmos, including ancestors, ancestral communion, or any form of spirituality, any form of spiritual practice and so forth, was fundamentally rooted in the land, fundamentally rooted in nature, fundamentally rooted in the cycles of nature as well. The cycles of night and day, the cycles of the seasonal cycles, the lunar cycles, the when you think about women, the menstrual cycles, the cycles of aging. We, in one of my previous book readings, we read a brilliant book by Bunseki Fukiao, a couple of books by Bunseki Fukiao from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and he speaks a lot about the Bakongo conception of the human being as being a rising sun and a setting. It's like this cyclical conception of what being a human is. Even life and death, it wasn't this linear thing that's just, oh, you're born and then you go along this straight line, Isaac Newton timeline thing, and then you die and you're dead. No, we're constantly spiraling and spiraling and spiraling and spiraling. Physical death of this particular phase of life wasn't the complete end, because there was another realm, whether it be reincarnation or different conceptions that original peoples have with regard to what life and death is all about. And it's like I said, it's through that. It's through by communing with the natural cycles, communing with our environment, communing with other members of our cosmos, be it human members or animal members or elemental members. If you think of this, the rain, stars, sun, and so forth. It's through communing with these things that we are able to commune with the divine, with ancestors, with the bigger, higher dimensions of being that that were central to these kind of were and are central to indigenous worldviews and more traditional quote unquote worldviews, if that makes sense. Now, I think an important point to bring up in this context is that these peoples also understood or believed or knew, whatever your perspective is, they knew that what we might in the West we just look on as just matter, just inert, clueless matter. It's just a whole bunch of stuff. These other worldviews, these older worldviews, recognize that everything is imbued in some way with some kind of consciousness or some kind of spirit or whatever the terms would be. Sometimes that's referred to as animism from the 20th century kind of Western academics who termed it that, meaning that in everything is an animating spirit, a spirit that animates, and so I think that's an important point to point out in these worldviews, and I think it will come. I'm gonna come back to that point later when we start going a little bit more into like the energy thing, because it can be easy to go down the road or fall into the trap of just thinking that, oh yeah, energies and light and radio waves and magnetic fields, thinking of all those things as just mechanical, blind, entities that have no consciousness in them. But I think it's important to understand that there probably is much more that we can find out and learn about with regard to the fact that all members of the cosmos, whether they be things that we consider to be conscious or not, have some kind of animating spirit in them, if you like. So yeah, these are the kind of indigenous first world peoples, original peoples' worldviews, and as a result of their worldview, you had those societies were. I'm not saying that they were perfect and idyllic, but one thing that they were is that they were very, 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 very in tune with their environments. Their societies were built on the natural cycles. You think about all of the different festivals and celebrations and traditions and rituals that took place on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, seasonal basis. All of those things, the rituality of life was embedded in the physical environment. It was embedded in nature, was embedded in the habitat in which we lived. And as a result of that, I think you could probably argue that people in those kinds of contexts are and were more in tune with nature. I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? You're going to be more in tune with nature if you are more in tune with nature. If your society is based on nature, if your society is based on the cycles of nature, if your family life, if your tribal life, your traditions and all that sort of stuff are based in nature, are built on nature, if conversing or communing with ancestors, with the divine, with the spirits that exist, the various different forces and spirits that exist in the world, in nature, in the universe, if that's a huge part of your upbringing and of your life, then obviously you are going to be more in tune with nature. And some of those people, of course, just to finish up this first section, some of those people go on to become particularly adept and particularly skilled and able to work with these energies, to work with the different energies around us, to understand them, to perceive them, and to adapt them for the benefit of others. And of course, those people go on to be Babalawo or Basangoma or shaman or whatever you want to call them. They're called in different parts of the world, all over the world. Amongst the indigenous peoples, you'll find the same thing. There were some people, male and female, who had particularly advanced abilities to engage and you know, work with the energies that are around us. So that's what I mean by the cosmological worldview, the concept of the cosmic self and the societies that are based on that concept of the cosmic self. Now, I just want to say, if you're enjoying what you're seeing so far, please do make sure you like, please do subscribe, and please do share. Let me know your comments as well. And I want to now talk a little bit about. So we've talked about this, this cosmological thing and the ancestors and spirit and so on and so forth. However, I know a lot of you are probably thinking, what on earth is this guy talking about? I thought this was a Pan-African science podcast, not, but and the reason why some of us are probably thinking that is because we have been raised in a Western paradigm whereby science and spirituality are never the twains shall meet. They're two separate things. And that is a byproduct of a platonic way of thinking, which Mama Marimba Ani breaks down in excellent detail in her book Urugu. I suggest you check out the book Urugu when you can. But in order to kind of build a little bit of a bridge, if you like, between that and the more sciencey, westerny sciencey stuff, and the reason why I even talked about that cosmological thing is that I think it's important for us to think that when we're talking about the energies in the universe and all that sort of stuff, that also does include the energies such as light, such as the energies in food and so on and so forth. Now, if you think about all of the different protagonists in this great dance of life, you're talking about, or I'm thinking about at least, different entities that in some shape or form are able to share energy, are able to emit energy, are able to put out energy, and that energy can influence the rest of the cosmos. But let's talk about energy. First of all, what is energy? Energy is not a very straightforward concept, actually. It is a concept, by the way, but it's not a very straightforward concept to understand. The more you dig, this is something that I'm learning in my kind of science, in this science journey, and that I'm going to start to kind of report through the Pan-African Science podcast. What I'm learning is that things that you might take for granted as being a straightforward thing on the surface level, because of what you've been taught in school and on TV and how it's presented in the films, media, even on YouTube videos, newspaper, are actually a lot more complicated usually once you actually start getting into the scientific literature. So energy, my understanding is energy is kind of one of those things. But at a basic level, you can understand energy to be the capacity or ability to do work, the capacity or ability to make change, to cause some sort of change in the cosmos. That's one good way of understanding what energy is. And energy can be broken down into two forms. It can be potential energy, or it can be kinetic energy. Potential energy is energy that is stored. It's not actually being expended to any great degree. So the classic example of stored energy would be if you have a bow and arrow. Let's just say you've got a bow and an arrow. When you pull the string back and you've got the arrow there, you've put a bunch of energy from you. Kinetic energy has moved from you and has been transferred into the bow that is now stretched and ready to fire. Like one of the Kushite bow archers who defeated the Muslim Caliphate in the battles of Dongola many hundreds of years ago. But anyway, so you've got the bow there and it's stretched and ready to fire. That there is stored energy. It's not actually being used, but it's stored energy. Yeah, and that's every form of matter is stored energy. Actually, matter is stored energy. It seems to me that all other forms of energy are in some way, shape, or form about kinetic energy, which is movement. So electrical energy, electricity, an electrical current is the flow of electrons going through a circuit. So it's the movement of these electrons through a circuit. It's kinetic energy, just in a different form. Thermal energy is the movement of is the thermal energy is created by the movement of particles, the high movement of particles. The more they move around, the more they kind of vibrate, if you like, the warmer they become, and they then emit heat, which is a form of movement. You know, that vibration goes out and heats up the particles in the air and other forms of matter and liquids and so forth. That's heat. That's just a form of kinetic energy. What are the forms of movement energy or kinetic energy are there? There is, you could say that even light is a form of kinetic energy, because light is the movement of photons through space, or through other or through matter, for that matter. So you've got these two main kind of divisions between energy. Potential energy, another example of potential energy, of course, is chemical energy. Chemical energy is the energy that is stored in chemical bonds, that is, in bonds between atoms and molecules. If those bonds are broken, which is what happens when we chew food, we are breaking down those molecules, and that releases that chemical energy that was stored in the chemical bonds. It releases it, and that's then converted in our bodies into various different types of energy. Kinetic energy, because we can turn it eventually into moving our bodies around, or heat, thermal energy, or electrical energy, sending messages through our nervous system, which is electrical based, and so on. There's all different forms of energy. And an important thing to point out with energy, as I'm sure you've heard, is that energy, as far as we know, cannot be created ex nihilo. It cannot be created out of nothing. You can only get energy from energy or matter, which is just a form of energy in itself. Energy cannot be created, and energy cannot be destroyed. When energy is used up, or energy can be converted into different forms or dissipated into different forms, but it never disappears. You'd always find it in some other form, if that makes sense. So, and that's important. That's a big truth, a big thing to kind of comprehend, that energy cannot be destroyed and cannot be created, because then you're beginning to be able to understand that, yeah, existence is cyclical. All of existence is cyclical. Even our human lives are cyclical. When we're born out of something that existed before. Of course, we're born in our mother's wombs and with our mother or father's DNA. Something is us, of course, for sure. And I'm not trying to be a materialist in saying that everything that is us is just from the physical. It's not. But a lot of what is us is the physical. And then when we die, the body doesn't just suddenly disappear and there's a fraction less energy in the world. No, that body, of course, is converted into different forms. And all the different microbes that feast on our corpses. I've read a superb article a few months ago that pointed out that a human corpse, or any kind of organism, the corpse of an organism, is actually, when that thing dies, it leads to an explosion of life, because all sorts of different life forms within the body and outside of the body feast on the body, basically, and which leads to more and more life. Maybe a bit morbid, but I think it's quite an amazing thing. So that's energy, the capacity to do work, and energy is always converted, never destroyed. And so one thing to understand is that going back to the cosmos idea, the cosmos you can understand to be an interplay between various different energy forms. So, for example, the sun, light from the sun is energy coming from the sun, and that energy travels to us, and it influences our bodies, it influences our minds, because it's converted into different forms of energy. Similarly, the light from the sun and the magnetic field of the sun influences the earth. That's why the planet Earth is circulating around the sun, because of the gravitational field of the sun. The other forms of there are many other forms, and I think this is starting to get to the crux, the key point I'm trying to get at, is that there are many forms of energy which are influencing our behavior and our health and our just who and what we are, that we can't perceive with our eyes, ears, nose, taste, and so on and so forth. We are not able to see most of the energy that comes from the sun, actually. Most of the energy that comes from the sun, and this is the point I made in episode 1 of the Pan-African Science podcast, most of that energy is invisible to human eyes, because the length, the way that we can only see wavelengths of a certain length, a certain proportion of the wavelength. That is a tiny proportion. I think it's something like 40% of the total light that reaches the Earth's surface. Only about 40% of that we can see. The rest of that energy from the sun, that light, we can't see it, but it's the majority of it. The majority of it is near infrared light, and then you've got ultraviolet light as well on the other side that comes to us. And those wavelengths, those portions of solar radiation, solar energy, have very significant impacts on our health, on our well-being, on our being, whether it be the ability, the regulation of our blood pressure, which is of ultraviolet light, and also near infrared light works in that, because it helps to trigger something called nitric oxide, which helps to lower our blood pressure and relax our blood vessels. Also, of course, the production of vitamin D. We can only produce vitamin D if we get ultraviolet light on our skin. And we can't see it with our eyes, but our skin can, in a sense, see the ultraviolet light. And when the skin sees, quote unquote, the ultraviolet light, it then, it converts that electromagnetic energy that's coming in, that we call ultraviolet radiation. It converts that energy into kinetic energy, and which the enzymes in our skin help to catalyze the precursors of vitamin D into vitamin D, and then it's a massive cascade of impacts that come from that. The production of melanin, of course, is triggered by ultraviolet light in particular. We can't see ultraviolet light, but the light is produced. The melanin is produced from that. So when people tan, tanning is a visible manifestation or a visible result of an invisible energy influence on us, if that's a good way of putting it. You could say the whole cosmos again is a very complex, very, very complex dance of energy exchange and energy conversion and influencing each other, speaking to each other, if you like. And human beings are the same. We're no different to any other member of this cosmos, any other member of this universe. The problem is, though, that in modern life we have been so detached from our environment, so detached even from each other, for goodness sake, so detached from natural cycles, that we are very, very, very poor at being able to perceive these different energy sources, or these different influences on us, even to a point where I think there's a psychological thing because of the whole materialism philosophy, the philosophy of materialism. We've come to a place where we think, okay, the most important influence on our health is food, because we can see food, we can see the things that we eat and drink. So we there's a multi-million-dollar podcast industry all about health, and diet and nutrition, and so many new fads come out every year or two all about, oh yeah, this is the best, I don't know, molecule that you need to eat, or this, and we forget and we ignore the wide range of other influences on our being. So what do I mean by modern life? People in the modern world are cut off from our environment. Well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? When you think about, for example, the fact that people in America and in the UK and probably most other Western countries report that they spend upwards of 90% of their time indoors. And that might not, we don't even think that's a particularly interesting or noteworthy thing, because when we're inside, we think, oh, it's the same kind of brightness as it is outside. It's fine. I don't see. It's because our eyes are not amazing tools. They're really good. The eyes do what we need them to do, which is to enable us to identify threats and dangers, enable us to identify opportunities, and that's great. But our eyes are not very good because our eyes can't pick up near infrared light. Our eyes can't see ultraviolet light. Our eyes can't see extremely low frequency microwaves, radio waves, and that sort of stuff. Because we can't see those or hear them, for that matter, or feel them. Our senses can't feel or perceive these things. We think that they're not there, and so we just ignore them. When someone comes and tells you, you know what, you might want to not put that mobile phone in your pocket, or not talk with the mobile phone right next to your ear, because that could, cause cancer in your head, basically. If someone tells the average person that, we'll be like, oh, come on, that can't be right, because we can't see it and we can't feel anything. And so we spend 90% of our time indoors, which means we're completely cut off from ultraviolet B light radiation from the sun, because that can't go through windows. A lot of the infrared as well can't really come through windows some windows anyway, very, very easily. A lot of us are completely out of sync with our circadian rhythms. So we spend all of our time indoors, away from proper bright blue light from outside, which we want blue light in the daytime. I talked about this in one of my previous podcasts. You want bright light, bright daylight, because that daylight has got lashings of so-called blue light. It doesn't look blue to our eyes, but we call it blue because it's in that kind of wavelength. And that blue light helps to trigger our alertness, our cognitive ability. It triggers the production of cortisol, which is called a stress hormone. But you want cortisol in the daytime to help to be alert and ready to do what you need to do, But children in particular these days are spending the vast majority of their day times indoors, away from natural blue light, which means that their cognitive abilities are plummeting all the time in the modern world. And then at nighttime as well, what you want is nighttime. You want darkness. We are adapted or evolved or designed to be in darkness after dark, so that we can sleep. But because of all the devices and the gadgets and the screen time and so forth, unfortunately, many people don't really get proper darkness at night. They're just constantly still bombarded with the light. And remember, I talked about blue light being can trigger cortisol. You want cortisol in the daytime. You don't want cortisol at night, because cortisol keeps you alert and keeps you focused, can keep you wired. And if you're at night and you're wired because of this cortisol, your ability to sleep is going to be massively affected. And it's been shown very conclusively that people with poor circadian rhythms or misaligned circadian rhythms, i.e. their sleep and wake cycle is completely out of sync with the night and day cycle. Remember, we talked about natural cycles of the cosmos. Then they get very sick. Cancer, cardiovascular disease, all these things. People who do shift work, unfortunately, are very at risk of getting these kinds of diseases. So even another thing, sound is something I'm definitely gonna research a lot more in this podcast series. But if you think about someone living in a city like London or New York or Lagos, for that matter, or Kuala Lumpur, what kinds of sounds are they hearing? Sound is energy. Sound is energy. It's kinetic energy. It's the vibration. It's the vibration of particles. That's what sound is. The vibration of particles sends out, vibrations in waves, and those waves is what we pick up with our ears. This the vibration. I'm talking now. The vibration in my larynx or voice box, mediated through my tongue and whatnot, is what is creating these words. And these words, what we perceive as words, is actually vibrations going through the air, picked up by a microphone, converted into electrical energy, transmitted through the wires. You're watching this online, so you're probably watching this. The signal is being transmitted through electromagnetic waves, radio waves specifically, and then it's converted into your computer or whatever you're watching this on, converted from electrical energy back into vibrations, which then vibrate through the air and are vibrating in your ear, banging your eardrums. And then there's another energy conversion. The energy is then converted from that kinetic energy, the vibration, into electrical energy. The electrical energy goes through the neurons, because neurons are based on electricity, electrical currents. The neurons send that message to the brain, and then the brain, you see what I'm getting at. But basically, if you think about sound is a form of energy. If you think about, just as most modern people are very detached from natural light coming from the sun, meaning that they're detached from the cosmos in large part. So also a lot modern people who live in cities, they're detached from natural sounds. All they're hearing is lorries and police sirens and industrial work and trains and mechanical. They're hearing a lot of mechanical sounds. We are hearing a lot of mechanical sounds. TV, sounds modulated, being filtered through gadgets and devices. How often are these people hearing birds tweeting? How often are they hearing the sound of rivers rushing? How often are they hearing the sound of leaves swaying in the wind? And again, this might sound like a bit namby-pamby. Well, who needs to hear this stuff? But I genuinely do think that these things that I'm talking about here, the fact that we are completely detached from natural light, we're completely detached, very detached from natural sounds, and the list could go on and on and on. It means that we're kind of like we're living in a matrix. I know it's a very overused metaphor, but it is like a matrix because we're cocooned in these boxes. Everything is filtered. The light is filtered through these windows, which block out a whole bunch of the solar spectrum. The sounds that we're hearing have got nothing to do with what's going on outside in nature. They're sounds to do with modulated sounds coming through speakers. I think there's probably an argument to be said that the sounds that you hear through a speaker is mechanically modulated in such a way that changes its composition, changes how it can affect our being. The list goes on and on. But my basic point is that, modern people are very cut off. And in energy, all of this energy that I'm talking about here, this energy conveys information or can convey information. So, if you see sun, if it's a bright sunny day and you're outside, that bright sunshine is sending a message to you, that we convert that message into, I feel good, I feel happy, I feel, everyone feels better basically in the sun. But it's the same for all these other invisible forms of energy. The ultraviolet light that I was talking about, that shines on our skin. It conveys information to the skin, right? Let's start to create some more melanin to absorb some of that electromagnetic energy in the form of the ultraviolet light. But also, let's make some vitamin D. Yeah, okay, cool. The cells and the enzymes and stuff say, cool, boom, it's ultraviolet light. That means it's vitamin D making time. Let's make vitamin D. All these different forms of energy convey, different forms of information, and those forms of information can be conscious, i.e., this is what we see and taste and touch, the smells. Obviously, the different things we smell. If you smell something, if you smell sulfur, you recoil because your body's like, oh, that's death. Whereas if you smell some wonderful food being cooked, or if you smell, flowers and, even a baby, infants have a smell, and that's one of the things that makes parents maternal and paternal, is because babies have a smell, and that smell sends information to us, or through the pheromones maybe as well, that kind of like, awakens our parenting, dynamic within us. But basically, it can be conscious, but it can also be subconscious or not conscious. There are various different ways in which sounds, taste, smell can influence us that we don't know they're influencing us. And also, there are things that we can't even perceive with our senses that can influence us. And one thing I want to give an example. There's one, I've been reading a little bit about how apparently, so the Earth has a magnetic field. You've got the North Pole and the South Pole. Actually, the North Pole should really be called the South Pole, and the South Pole the North Pole, because when you have a compass, the north part of the compass, is supposed to point to the south, because the north and south are what attract each other. But the North Pole of the compass points north. So it's just a funny little thing. It should really be called the South Pole, because the North magnet. But anyway, so we've got this magnetic field, and many creatures, many animals use that magnetic field for their navigation. Birds in particular, insects can use it as well, apparently. And I've heard it said that dogs apparently usually when they using the toilet to defecate, open their bowels, empty their bowels, they will align themselves in a particular direction, north-south orientation. How do they know where north and south is? Because they've got some kind of equipment in their bodies that help them to do that. Now, apparently, we also have some of this equipment in our bodies as human beings that can perceive magnetic changes in the magnetic field. And I'll talk about this properly in a future video, but apparently we've got in our eyes, we've got some kind of iron particles, which is the same thing that what some of these other animals have, which, you know, obviously iron is attracted to magnets. And apparently that's one of the things that gives us this ability. And also that apparently there's something in our nose bones, some kind of equipment, which again, other animals have, which, you know, is sensitive to the magnetic field. And what that made me think is that I wonder how many people there are in the world who still have the ability to perceive and to sense that magnetic field. You know, I'd love to hear that. And then another example as well is that there are some people, I talked about smell, and smell can convey information. There are some people who can smell certain diseases. There are some people who can smell Alzheimer's disease and some people who can smell Parkinson's disease. These are neurodegenerative diseases, i.e. diseases that cause the neurons in our nervous system, our brains in particular, to stop working properly and to die. And there are some people who can smell, if someone's got Parkinson's disease, they'll smell it on them. Isn't that amazing? And again, it makes me wonder, like, how many more people are there who have got these kind of powers that we consider a little bit like X-Men-ish? But unfortunately, the majority of people in the Western world and in modern societies which are aping the Western pattern, which is most societies around the world, sadly, the majority of us are so, I think there's two things. One, we've been so programmed and conditioned to not listen, to shut off those parts of our being, our intuition and so forth, which do not conform to a rationalistic approach. So if someone gets a feeling about something, particularly as children are often taught, shut up, be quiet, stop crying, da, 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 da. And unfortunately, I do it. I'm a parent. I probably do that all the time. But what we're doing when we do that is that we're probably likely alienating these children from some of these senses that they probably have. You know, some of these abilities to perceive energies that they have, but because we've got our schedule, we've got our routine, we've got our, you know, we've got the things that we need to do. We need to go shopping. You need to go to school. I need to go to work. Da, 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 da. We haven't got time to sit down and get into these things. So we just tell them to shut up. And then over time, they're like, oh, they learn to shut that down, those parts of them down. And that's a really, really sad thing. Another thing as well is that, and I'll close with this because this is probably a good place to close. Again, if you're liking what you're hearing, please do like, please do share and subscribe, and let me know your comments as well. And the other thing I want to talk about is that I've talked about how the modern men and women are living in a matrix. Basically, we're completely cut off from the more natural energy influences that are coming from our environment, from the land, from the, you know, from the sky, from wherever it might be coming from, and other dimensions for that matter. But not just that, we are then surrounded by a bunch of man-made energies, in particular some of these electromagnetic waves that are constantly, you know, floating about in our rooms, inside and outside, but particularly inside. The Wi-Fi is on, the microwave oven is on, the mobile phone is on, the TV is on. You know, even the electrical wiring that's going through the wires through the house, that creates electromagnetic fields, that puts out energetic fields, and all of those fields are probably just completely overpowering our abilities to be able to, you know, it's probably just really discombobulating us, basically. And when you think about how the amount of people that you know that are just constantly anxious, constantly stressed out, constantly depressed, constantly dealing with chronic illnesses, even when they're eating so well, this, that, and the other. But I think some of that is likely to be due to the fact that we are these energies are impacting us, but we don't know that they're impacting us because it's not part of common knowledge really to talk about these things. And this is the big motivation for me in this podcast, is to really start to learn myself about these different energies and how our bodies and our minds interact with these different energies, and how, you know, the different energy flows within us work, so that we can start to take control back over our energetic environments, if you like. Take control. You know, there's very simple things that we can do that I won't go into, but one of the basic ones is, when you're not using your phone, just turn it off, man. Just turn the phone off, or put it on airplane mode. Put the phone far away from you at all times. Put the phone do not let a child have a mobile phone until they're much older. I mean, this is basic. Like, I see children who've got a mobile phone, they're putting it on their heads, and they're watching, you know, being bombarded with this blue light that's coming from the phone. They're not getting any of the infrared light from outside because they're indoors 90% of the time, like their parents are. They're not getting the ultraviolet light, so they're going to be low in vitamin D. They're not going to, you know, all these things are stressing them out and stressing out their psyches and their bodies. And I would imagine that on some level our bodies are just like frazzled. They just can't. Or I say our bodies, we are just frazzled. We just can't operate optimally because we are bombarded with this cacophony of energies, man-made energies, which are stripped down, stripped away, you know, stripped out of the context that they're supposed to be, that we have adapted to or evolved in over, you know, the thousands and thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years that we've been in existence as a species. And yeah, I just think that that is one of the, you know, that is what I've done in this podcast. I think they're the main things that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, what I've done in this podcast is episode 8 of this podcast is to basically explain the purpose of this podcast. The purpose of this podcast, one of the main purposes of this podcast, is to enlighten myself and to hopefully share that enlightenment, or share that. Enable you guys, or encourage you guys to also enlighten yourself about the importance of connecting with the cosmos around us and living in harmony with the cosmos, living in harmony with nature, living in harmony with the cycles and the rhythms of nature, and understanding that is not only a metaphysical thing, but also involves very mundane forms of influence that we get and that we receive from our surroundings and our environment, but we can't perceive them, we can't see them, they're invisible. Most of them are invisible to us. We can't see, taste, touch them, but they are having an enormous influence on us. And it's up to us as people, whoever you are, whatever your background, it's critical that we take the time to reconnect us with the cosmos, to reconnect ourselves and re-embed ourselves with this wonderful planet Earth that we have, you know, as our home, and to find out ways that on an individual level we can shield ourselves from the discombobulating energies of modern life, but also see how we might be able to start to work together to create enclaves or influence government policies wherever we might be, to start to make somewhat of a difference to our energetic environment, which ultimately that's the base. That's life. Life is all about our energetic environment. If you're talking about politics, if you're talking about, you know, economics or whatever, all of these things are about people being able to live life, and life is all about the flow of energy. So I hope you've enjoyed that. My name's Eli Wananda. This has been the Pan-African Science Podcast, episode 8. Let me know if you like this format of this podcast. I was doing the shorter formats with the slides and stuff, but I'm feeling like I'm led to be doing these more free-form conversations that can kind of be more meditative and a bit more, you know, circular, a bit more spiral in the way that we talk about these things. So let me know your thoughts on it. Take good care. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe again. Take care. I'll see you soon.